Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. There is a fault line that lies beneath much of the current turmoil in the Middle East, and it runs between Riyadh and Tehran. Sunni Saudi Arabia and Shia Iran are locked in a series of conflicts by proxy. It is a dangerous and costly struggle for regional supremacy that runs from Lebanon to Yemen by way of Syria and Iraq. I'm joined by two guests, Mohammad Marandi in Tehran and Jamal Khashoggi in Jeddah, both respected political analysts. Is there any way to take the heat out of the Saudi-Iranian confrontation? Mohammad Marandi in Tehran and Jamal Khashoggi in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Welcome, both of you, to Hard Talk. Let me start with a simple question for both of you. Relations between your two countries are currently toxic. Diplomatic relations have been severed. Mohammad Marandi in Tehran first. Is this something that the Iranian government deliberately wanted, set out to achieve, or is this crisis in relations something that has happened by accident?
No, I think definitely the Iranians did not want a break in relations. The Iranians believe that the Saudis have been showing erratic behavior for quite a long time. A few months ago, hundreds of Iranian pilgrims died during the Hajj pilgrimage alongside thousands of others. And the Saudis, because of Saudi incompetence, and the Saudis not only didn't apologize, but they didn't even show remorse or express condolences. And this angered Iranians a great deal. But subsequent to that, the Iranians did not break off relations. The Saudis, on the other hand, after beheading a sheikh who had never carried arms nor advocated violence, people in Iran became angry. And some people went to an empty building, the embassy. They did the wrong thing. It was absolutely incorrect. People were arrested, and a senior official was dismissed. But they threw stones and a firebomb, and the Saudis cut off relations. So when we compare the two instances, it's obvious that the Iranians are the ones who have shown patience, as they showed a few months ago. And the Saudis, I think the belief here at least is that the Saudis want confrontation.
All right, well, Jamal Khashoggi, you've just heard the Iranian narrative there presented by Mohammad Marandi. Does that match what you perceive to be reality?
The severing of relations was the straw that broke the back of a very sour relationship that lasted for many years. It all started because of Iranians' expansionism. It is Iranians' militia that is fighting and killing Syrians in Syria. Iranian support to a sectarian party that hijacked the political process in Yemen. All of that led to a falling apart Middle East. We need to fix the Middle East. It would be much better of the Iranians to pull out their militias, their hatred out of Syria, sit with us, the Saudi, and talk peace. If they cannot do that, just get out of the Middle East, go back to Iran, and let us fix the Middle East along with Turkey, along with Pakistan, along with the international community, because it has become so dangerous for all of us. So all what we need is for the Iranians to stop their meddling in the Middle East.
Right. Well, if only life were that simple, Jamal Khashoggi. You've raised so many different points there about different theatres of conflict in the region. We'll have to take them one by one. But before we get to any external issues, let's just stick with Saudi Arabia for a moment. I mean, your government beheaded 47 people at the beginning of this year, including the senior Shia cleric and dissident Nimr al-Nimr. Now, the decision to do that was obviously taken conscious that it would infuriate and enrage and provoke Tehran. So I come back to this point about conscious decision-making. Why did the Saudis see fit to do that at this particular time?
If I want to give a reason why we executed Nimr al-Nimr, I have to give a reason why we executed other 46 Saudis who were implicated of terrorism. And some of them also clergies to Al-Qaeda and important leaders to Al-Qaeda. So they all were tried under our court. It is hypocritical to talk about execution of violent breachers while the Iran is doing the same thing. The Iranians, and that's what Human Rights Watch is saying, has executed 200 people. A number of them were under muharaba. They have a law from fiqh jurisprudence that allowed the execution of somebody who endangered the state. So if the Iranians are doing that, why can't we do it? It's not, I'm not saying we are doing it because of the Iranians, but this is the law.
Yeah, well, it's a point that I'm going to put directly to Mohammad Marandi then. Mohammad Marandi, it is a bit rich, is it not, of the Iranians, and particularly your foreign minister in the New York Times, Mr. Zarif, to say, first of all, that the Saudi actions, the executions at the beginning of the year were an act of barbarism, and then to say, look, Saudi Arabia has a choice. It can continue promoting sectarian hatred, or it can choose to play a constructive role in promoting regional stability, as if Iran doesn't execute people, as if Iran does not play sectarian and communal politics in the region, just as Saudi Arabia does. What hypocrisy from your government.
Well, Stephen, I think that most objective observers would know that there's no comparison between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, first of all, is a Wahhabi regime, and it promotes a very extreme ideology, and it shouldn't be attributed to Sunni Islam. It is discriminatory. Saudi textbooks speak of discrimination. They believe that those who do not believe the ideology of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab are not real Muslims, and that in many instances we see that the Saudis justify the death of people and minorities because of that. And it's interesting that ISIL, Al-Qaeda, and other extremist groups in Iraq and Syria, they use the same textbooks and books that are used in Saudi Arabia to teach. And that's why we see the Yazidis or in Iraq, their communities destroyed. That's why the Christian community was destroyed. The same attacks take place in Syria. And in fact, it was the Iranians who saved Kurdish, Sunni, Arbil from ISIL attacks. So there's really no comparison. Iran is opposed to sectarianism. It does not exist in Iranian textbooks. We have Christian MPs.
Well, it's dangerous territory you're on, Mr. Marandi, given the record of Iranian leaders of recent vintage questioning the Holocaust and coming out with various anti-Semitic words and phrases. If you suggest to me that Iran is an entirely non-sectarian regime with leaders who are committed to tolerance and freedom, I'm going to question that, clearly.
Of course.
Well, I would be glad if you tried to question it, but none of the Iranian leaders, past or present, have ever made anti-Semitic remarks. Iran does not equate Judaism with Zionism. Iran believes Zionism is an apartheid ideology, just like apartheid South Africa, and that's the reason why Iran opposes it. If someone in Iran, you're referring to President Ahmadinejad, question the Holocaust itself or the extent of the Holocaust, that's one individual, and that whether we accept the language that he uses, I personally do not like that sort of language, but he never made any anti-Semitic remarks.
You know what, let's not get too silent. I think our viewers can judge for themselves. Yeah, I think with respect to both of you, I think our viewers can judge for themselves whether there are any comparisons between your respective governments when it comes to sectarianism. Let's park that for the moment and let's talk about the various proxy conflicts that currently engage your two governments and are bringing turmoil to the Middle East region. Let's start with Syria. Before relations between your two countries were severed, there was some hope that this month was going to see a breakthrough coming together of all the different parties to the Syria conflict, including the Assad government, rebel representatives, and all of the external powers who have a role to play, including, obviously, the Saudi and Iranian representatives. From both of your perspectives, given where you are today in your bilateral relationship, is it impossible to believe that your two governments can work together to find a solution to Syria? Start with you, Mr. Khashoggi.
Yes, we should do that. But we, the Saudis, don't have militias that fighting the Syrian people while the Iranians are doing that. So we demand of the Iranians to pull out of Syria so we can bring peace back to Syria. We in Saudi Arabia, we are standing with the Syrian people. We brought to Riyadh every single representative of the Syrian people, whether from the majority Sunnis to the Alawi, to the Shias, to the Druze, to the Christians. They were all represented in Riyadh, and they formed the team that will negotiate peace in Geneva. So we are supporting the Syrian people, while the Iranians are supporting a dictator.
Well, you're supporting Saudi Arabia's money and logistical support is going, for example, to the Nusra Front, one of the key rebel forces.
No. If a single, of course not. If, the United States, United Kingdom, the international world will hold us liable if we send a single gunshot to the Nusra Front. We are supporting legitimate Syrian opposition whom the international community support. They are the one whom we are supporting, but of course we are very much anti-Al-Nusra. Al-Nusra is a terrorist organization as much as ISIS and Hezbollah. So it's that is not that's truly not true.
You know, I know many independent observers don't believe that. I wonder how that goes down in Tehran.
Yes, just last night I read an interview with the Indian ambassador to Damascus during 2011 and 12, and he was saying that the governments, the Arab country governments in the Persian Gulf region, they were involved in this, and from the very beginning in Syria, Al-Qaeda was involved. And he also said he spoke about the role that Al Jazeera played. But more importantly, let's go to General Flynn, the head of the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency at that time, which is this most important organization, intelligence organization, military intelligence organization in the United States. He had 20,000 people working for him. A document from the Defense Intelligence Agency basically said that they knew from early on in Syria that the dominant groups that were fighting the Syrian government were the extremists. They knew that their allies were supporting these governments, like Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Qatar. And they knew that there was a strong possibility that an extremist state, which included Al-Qaeda, and remember, ISIL back then was Al-Qaeda in Iraq, that they would be able to possibly form a government of sorts between Iraq and Syria. Then General Flynn did an interview on Al Jazeera, ironically, and admitted that the United States took a willful decision to support its allies in Syria and their pursuit of these policies. So the United States, the Saudis, the Qataris, and the Turks, they all were supporting the extremists.
Isn't the problem here that neither of your governments is prepared? Neither of your governments is prepared to tell the truth, which is that you are fueled by paranoia of each other. And despite both of you telling me that you don't believe in sectarian politics, both in Tehran and Riyadh there is this zero-sum mentality, which suggests that, you know, if we don't project our power in a place, then our bitter rivals, the Saudis, stroke Iranians, depending on where you sit, will benefit. And because of that zero-sum mentality, Yemen, Syria, you could argue about Lebanon and Iraq and a host of other theaters of operation too, have become this arena for a struggle between your two governments. That's the truth, isn't it?
If we have a Middle Eastern map right now and we look where whom Iran is supporting, it is supporting always, exclusively, sectarian groups, whether in Syria, in the form of the government of Syria, in Lebanon in the form of Hezbollah, in Yemen in the form of the Houthi who hijacked the political process in Yemen, while Saudi Arabia is dealing with the people of Syria, the people of Yemen who wants a better future, who wants to build a new Yemen, not a sectarian Yemen.
Look, let's talk Yemen for just... Hang on, let me stop you. Let me talk Yemen specifically for just a moment. You are propping up President Hadi, who we all know, if your bombers and your equipment and your money were not propping him up, he would be out of the country in no time at all. He's not the product of some sort of popular movement. He's your puppet.
No, President Hadi is the head of a transitional government that was in the middle of a political process that was hijacked by the Houthi and Ali Abdullah Saleh, the former dictator of Yemen, whom the Iranians are supporting today. Iranians have now they favor dictators in the Middle East, Bashar al-Assad or Ali Abdullah Saleh. So we are in favor of the political process in Yemen. We are not against the Houthi because they are Shia. We are against the Houthi because they hijacked and refused a political process, because it is the only way to bring peace to Yemen.
Well, you say we're against the Houthis. The truth is, what you are doing is killing civilians by the thousand. The death toll in Yemen has gone up way beyond 5,000. Many of those people are civilians, and even today there's a report of more civilian casualties. In one particular terrible bombing last September, more than 130 people were killed in a wedding party. Your bombs are doing the sort of damage that many people around the world would regard as criminal, war crimes.
No. Most of those incidents, when they were investigated, it turned out to be they were targeted by the Houthi bombing. The Houthi are starving people in Taiz. We are targeting military locations. The Hezbollah, the Shi'i party that the Iranians support, they are starving people in Madaya, in Syria. And you saw the pictures on the BBC.
Well, let's take a bigger view of this, away from the individual sort of theaters of conflict in the region, and let's think about both of your governments and your relationship with the United States of America. Now, this month is supposed to see the next level of implementation of the nuclear deal between the international powers and Iran. We've just seen in the last 24 hours a serious incident which has been diffused, where American military personnel appear to have encroached on Iranian territorial waters and have since been released. The relationship between Washington and Tehran is fragile. Mohammad Marandi, do you believe that this nuclear deal is going to stick?
Obviously, the Saudis don't want it to stick, nor do the Israelis. But we have to see. And actually, in this recent incident, we saw that the Americans were behaving irresponsibly. Their boats went into Iranian territory when they were immediately arrested by the naval forces of the Revolutionary Guards. We saw American ships and an American aircraft carrier behaving aggressively in the region, and the Iranians told them that to abide by international law and behave more responsibly. Ultimately, the Iranians carried out an investigation, and they saw that there was a problem with their navigation system, and they released these people. But I think so it is fragile. But I think that
it's also fragile because there are serious players inside Tehran, so-called hardliners, who are still deeply suspicious of President Rouhani and his agenda of warming up relations with Washington, yes?
No, I don't agree with that. I think that the political establishment in Iran, the major players, they have all agreed to go by this agreement. Parliament has approved it. The Supreme National Security Council has approved it. There was a major discussion in Iran about the pros and cons of the agreement, but ultimately it was approved. So
I just want to take this back, this thought about America, back to Jeddah and to Jamal Khashoggi. Here's the words of a former U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Robert Jordan. He says, the Saudis are feeling a real sense of encirclement right now. They feel abandoned by the Obama administration. You know that the Iranians are going to get unfrozen pretty much $100 billion worth of assets as a result of this deal. You see the warming of relations overall between Washington and Tehran, and you in Saudi Arabia are deeply, deeply worried about that, are you not?
Yes, we are, and I'll tell you why. Yes, we want Iran. It is good for Iran to be reincorporated into a peaceful Middle East, but not this Iran, not aggressive Iran. A different Iran like Turkey or Pakistan that wants to be truly part of a peaceful Middle East. But we think it is wrong of the Americans, and particularly Mr. Obama, to separate between the nuclear issue and Iranians' behavior in the region. what is a danger to world peace is Iranians' behavior in the region, and the Americans and the international community should should put a check on Iran, what they do. Look what they are doing in Syria, what they are doing in Yemen, what they are doing hijacking the political system in Lebanon. This is all wrong internationally for international peace. So I wish that the international community would have a consideration and link the nuclear issue to Iranians' behavior in the Middle East, because their Iranians' record is not that great in the Middle East.
Well, for both of you, it strikes me that you're at a fundamentally difficult moment right now. Leave aside all of the conflict we've just discussed. You're both under immense economic pressure because of the plummeting price of oil. As we speak today, it's around $30 US a barrel. I think in Saudi Arabia, you need $100 a barrel to make your budgets work. In Iran, similarly, you need a much higher price of oil to dig yourself out of huge annual deficits. Saudi first. When we look at what you're doing today, we see a government that's talking about austerity. We see a deputy crown prince who actually cites Mrs. Thatcher when he talks about imposing swinging cuts on the subsidies that your people are used to. There's also talk of a sales tax. You've got a deficit that's 15% of your national income. You're in crisis right now.
No, I don't feel the crisis, and the Saudi market doesn't really feel the crisis, but we are going through difficulties. We want to have a better Saudi Arabia, a prosperous Saudi Arabia. We all want that. But on the same time, we have another priority. It is an existential matter to have a secure Middle East. We cannot allow Iranians to win in Syria and impose a dictatorship, a sectarian dictatorship in Syria nor in Yemen. So I wish that the Iranians and we, the Saudis, will think of the broader picture.
Let's give the final word to Tehran, to Mr. Marandi. And I come back to economics because, in a sense, economics drives everything. Saudi Arabia has pretty much the world's biggest and certainly cheapest to exploit oil reserves. It has a much more effective oil industry than you do. Your economy already has severe unemployment, high inflation. In the end, economics dictates that Iran is not going to be able to project its power the way it wants.
I think that the Iranians have already been under sanctions for a number of years, and the Iranians are not projecting power in a negative way. The Iranians are supporting indigenous groups in different countries, and that's why the Saudis are losing in Yemen, because they're supporting an unpopular former president whose term in office had expired. The Saudis are supporting extremists in Syria, but I would like to lecture the United States and Europeans. The deputy chancellor of Germany warned Saudi Arabia that they're spreading extremism in Europe and Wahhabism. The German intelligence said that Saudi Arabia is becoming a threat to Europe. This is their allies who are saying this, not Iran. But the real fault is with the United States and the Europeans, who allowed Saudi Arabia to export extremism to Afghanistan. And then we had 9/11. We had the explosions in London. But they allowed this to happen again over the past few years. We saw what happened in Syria and Iraq. And now we have the refugees in Europe and the explosions in the United States, in Istanbul, people who came from Saudi Arabia and the United States. It is the fault of the United States for allowing this extremism to be exported from Saudi Arabia, and now the chickens are coming home to roost.
Well, we haven't had a meeting of minds, but we've had an interesting debate. We have to end there. So Mohammad Marandi and Jamal Khashoggi, thank you both very much for being on Hard Talk.